My grandfather refused to sell this land, and there was a reason. I never expected 3 patrol cars to show up because I said one simple sentence: "I'm not a member of your HOA." At first, I thought it was just another neighbor trying to push a boundary. Then the sheriff checked the county records, and the whole story started falling apart. Hidden leases, missing money, a burned barn, and one document that changed everything. If you've ever wondered how far someone will go to claim land that isn't theirs, stay with me. Because this didn't end the way anyone expected. And if you enjoy real property rights stories where patience, evidence, and the law matter more than shouting, take a second to subscribe. There are plenty more roads like this one, and I'd be glad to have you along for the ride. I wasn't looking for a fight that afternoon. I was looking for a missing fence post. The western fence along my lake ranch had stood there longer than I had been alive. My grandfather set those cedar posts by hand, lining them up with the original county survey markers after buying the property nearly 60 years ago. Every spring I walked that boundary, partly out of habit, partly because old fences tell you when something is wrong before people do. That morning, one section looked different. Fresh tire tracks cut through the grass. One post had been pulled completely out of the ground. Another leaned at an angle where someone had clipped it with heavy equipment. Beyond it, an excavator sat beside a trench that hadn't existed 2 days earlier. Orange pipe disappeared beneath a mound of loose dirt, stretching toward Maple Ridge Estates. I climbed out of my pickup, grabbed my phone, and started taking photographs. The machine wasn't on HOA property. It wasn't even close. The bucket sat several feet inside land owned by the Walker Family Trust. I walked carefully to the edge of the trench, recording everything before saying a word. Fresh tracks, broken fence, removed survey stake, contractor decals, permit posted on a temporary sign. I zoomed in. The permit approved drainage work. What it didn't include was permission from the landowner. That mattered. In Colorado, crossing a recorded property boundary without authorization wasn't something you fixed with an apology after the concrete dried. I heard heels crunching across gravel before I saw her. "Well," Brenda Holloway said smoothly, "I wondered how long it would take before you showed up." She wore pressed khaki pants, polished boots, sunglasses, and the confident smile of someone accustomed to winning arguments before they began. Behind her stood 2 HOA board members and the excavation supervisor. I lowered my phone. "Your contractor crossed my fence." Brenda barely glanced toward the trench. "No, Mr. Walker. They're improving community drainage. They crossed my property line. They're inside Maple Ridge." I pointed toward the broken cedar post. "That fence marks my boundary." She folded her arms. "Your fence isn't the legal boundary. The county survey says otherwise." She smiled again. "County surveys get updated. They don't move themselves overnight." One of the contractors shifted uncomfortably. He looked at Brenda before speaking. "We were told this was common area." "I own this ground," I replied. Brenda laughed softly. "No, Ethan." She took one slow step closer. "You own a ranch outside the subdivision. I own this parcel. You aren't a resident. I'm also not a member of your HOA." The words came out calm, matter of fact. No anger, just the truth. For a second, she said nothing. Then that smile returned. "Good." She reached into her purse. "If you're not part of this community," she pulled out her phone, "then you don't belong here." She dialed. I watched her turn slightly away. "Yes," she said. "We have a trespasser interfering with construction at Maple Ridge Estates." I almost laughed. Instead, I kept taking photographs. The contractor looked increasingly uneasy. "So you're really calling the sheriff?" Brenda nodded without looking at me. "I've tried being reasonable. You've never spoken to me before today. I've spoken to your attorney. That's because you keep sending paperwork that doesn't apply to my land." She ignored that. A few homeowners had gathered near the clubhouse, then more. Word travels quickly in neighborhoods where nothing exciting usually happens. Within 10 minutes, nearly 30 people stood watching from sidewalks, porches, and golf carts. Some whispered, others pointed. Several raised their phones. The excavator sat silent while everyone waited. I stayed exactly where I was. Not because I wanted a confrontation, because walking away would make it look like I agreed this wasn't my land. The first patrol vehicle rounded the corner faster than I expected. Its tires chirped against the pavement. A second cruiser followed, then a third. Red and blue lights reflected across the clubhouse windows, the marina parking lot, and the calm surface of the lake beyond. Every curtain facing the entrance seemed to move at once. The neighborhood had become an audience. Deputies stepped out quickly. One younger officer approached first. "Sir, step away from the equipment." I complied immediately. Another deputy moved toward Brenda. She launched into her version before anyone asked a question. "He's been trespassing around our construction site." She pointed directly at me. "He doesn't live here. He keeps interfering with contractors. We're concerned about resident safety." Every sentence came out polished, practiced, like she'd rehearsed it. The younger deputy turned back to me. "Identification, please." I handed him my driver's license. "Ethan Walker. You live here?" "I live at Walker Ranch." He glanced toward Brenda. She answered before I could. "Outside the subdivision." I nodded. "Correct. So why are you here today?" I lifted my phone, photographing construction on my property. Brenda shook her head dramatically. "No, deputy. This land belongs to Maple Ridge." I reached into my truck and removed a folded survey map from behind the seat. "I have documentation." The deputy raised a hand. "Sir, don't reach suddenly." I stopped immediately. "No problem." He took the map himself. Brenda sighed loudly. "Those old papers don't change ownership." I looked directly at her. "They usually do." The deputy unfolded the survey. He frowned. Another officer walked over, then another. They quietly compared the map with something on a tablet. One of them called toward the senior officer standing beside the third cruiser. "Sheriff?" A tall man with gray at his temples approached. His name tag read, Luke Harmon. He accepted the survey without saying a word. He looked at me. "You claiming this parcel belongs to you?" "I'm claiming it belongs to the Walker Family Trust." Brenda interrupted. "It doesn't." Sheriff Harmon didn't respond. Instead, he asked me one simple question. "Do you know the parcel number?" 188421. He repeated it to the deputy holding the tablet. "Run County GIS. Full ownership history." The deputy nodded and walked back toward the cruiser. The neighborhood had gone strangely quiet. Even the contractor stopped pretending to organize equipment. No engines, no conversation. Just dozens of people waiting. Brenda still looked completely confident. She leaned toward one of the board members and whispered something that made both of them smile. I stood beside the broken fence, trying not to think about what would happen if county records had somehow been altered without my knowledge. I trusted my grandfather. I trusted recorded deeds. But I also knew people with enough money sometimes tried to rewrite history. The deputy sat inside the cruiser for nearly 2 minutes. Then another. His fingers stopped moving across the keyboard. He stared at the screen. His expression changed. He looked up toward Sheriff Harmon. For the first time since arriving. The sheriff stopped speaking. He simply took the tablet from the deputy, stared at the parcel map, and his face went completely still. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Brenda Holloway's confident smile remained in place, but I noticed something small change around her eyes. She wasn't watching me anymore. She was watching the sheriff. Sheriff Luke Harmon zoomed in on the county GIS map, then switched to another screen. His thumb moved across the display with practiced patience before he looked at the deputy beside him. "Run the recorded deed chain." "Yes, Sheriff." The deputy nodded and began typing again. Brenda stepped forward. Surely this is unnecessary. Sheriff Harmon didn't even look up. It'll only take a minute. The HOA owns all of this property. We'll know shortly. She forced a laugh. I've been president for 6 years. Congratulations. His voice stayed calm. But the county records don't recognize elected positions. Several homeowners exchanged uneasy glances. One man quietly lowered his phone. Another stopped recording altogether. The excavator operator climbed down from his machine, removed his hard hat, and stood beside the trench without saying a word. I remained exactly where I was. The broken fence separated us from the construction site like it always had. Only now everyone seemed to realize that fence might actually matter. The deputy finally looked up. Got it. Sheriff Harmon accepted the tablet again. He read silently. Then he asked me one question. You're Ethan Walker? Yes. Trustee of the Walker Family Trust? I became trustee last year. He nodded once. Then he turned toward Brenda. Mom. His voice carried clearly enough for everyone standing nearby. Mr. Walker is not trespassing. Brenda blinked. I'm sorry? He is standing on land owned by the Walker Family Trust. She laughed again. No. The sheriff rotated the tablet toward her. Parcel 18421. She glanced down. The Walker Family Trust owns approximately 134 acres surrounding and beneath portions of Maple Ridge Estates. That's impossible. The county disagrees. She stared at the screen. Her expression hardened. That's outdated. Sheriff Harmon shook his head. It was updated after the trust transfer last year. It has to be wrong. It includes today's ownership records. A murmur spread through the crowd. Someone quietly asked, What does that mean? Another homeowner answered before the sheriff could. I don't know. Sheriff Harmon continued reading. The clubhouse. He looked toward the large stone building behind us. The Marina Access Road. His finger moved across the map. The drainage easement. Another pause. And approximately 11 acres of shoreline beneath Maple Ridge Estates remain property of the Walker Family Trust under a recorded ground lease. Silence. Real silence. Not the kind created by people waiting to speak. The kind created by people suddenly realizing everything they believed might be wrong. Brenda recovered first. There must be another filing. There isn't. The HOA purchased those parcels. Sheriff Harmon looked directly at her. I'm not seeing any deed transferring ownership. Our attorneys handled all of that. Then they should have recorded it. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. I watched several homeowners slowly turn toward the clubhouse. For years they'd parked there, held meetings there, celebrated birthdays there, complained about landscaping there. None of them had ever questioned who actually owned the ground beneath it. One older gentleman stepped forward. Excuse me, he looked at me. My wife and I bought here 12 years ago. I nodded. Were we supposed to know this? I don't know what your closing documents said. We've always paid the HOA. So have your neighbors. He looked genuinely confused. I thought that meant they owned everything. It doesn't. Sheriff Harmon folded the tablet. Owing dues isn't the same as owning land. The words hung over the crowd. Brenda tried another approach. This isn't relevant. It is today. The construction was approved. Approved by whom? The HOA board. I pointed toward the trench. My permission wasn't requested. She crossed her arms again. The drainage benefits the neighborhood. It crosses trust property. The easement allows improvements. Sheriff Harmon looked at me. Do you dispute the easement? I don't dispute the easement. Every eye shifted toward me. I dispute the excavation outside the recorded easement. The sheriff nodded slowly. That's a different issue. I walked to my truck and carefully removed a survey tube. This time, nobody stopped me. Inside was a certified boundary survey completed less than 2 years earlier. Tom Alvarez had supervised it himself. I unfolded the large map across the hood of my pickup. The sheriff leaned over it. Orange survey pins, recorded bearings, property monuments. The drainage easement appeared as a narrow strip. The freshly dug trench sat well beyond it, nearly 12 feet beyond. Sheriff Harmon compared the survey to the county map. Then he looked at the trench. Finally, he turned toward the contractor. "Who instructed you to dig here?" The contractor hesitated. "Our project manager." "Who gave him authorization?" He glanced nervously toward Brenda. "The HOA." The sheriff's expression didn't change. "Did anyone provide written permission from the landowner?" "No, sir." "Were you told this parcel belonged to the HOA?" "Yes." Brenda immediately interrupted. "Because it does." "No." The sheriff's answer came instantly. "The records don't support that." She took one step closer. "You can't decide ownership standing beside a ditch." "I'm not deciding it." He calmly tapped the folded survey. "The county already did." For the first time since she'd arrived, Brenda looked genuinely rattled. She lowered her voice. "There has to be another explanation." I answered before the sheriff could. "There probably is." She looked at me. "Oh, what are you talking about?" I held her gaze. "I've been trying to understand why my family trust hasn't received its annual ground lease payment." A flicker crossed her face. Tiny, almost invisible. But it was there. The sheriff noticed it too. "Ground lease?" I nodded. "My grandfather leased portions of this property decades ago." Brenda spoke quickly. "That's ancient history." "No." I looked toward the clubhouse. "It's current law." Several homeowners frowned. One woman raised her hand. "Wait." She looked between us. "We've been paying a land stability fee every month." Another neighbor added, "I thought that was just part of the HOA dues." "So did I." "So did everyone." Brenda's voice sharpened. "This isn't the place to discuss association finances." "It became the place," I said quietly, "when you called 3 patrol cars and accused the landowner of trespassing." Nobody laughed. Nobody defended her. The sheriff turned toward one of his deputies. "Photograph the excavation." Then toward another. "Document the damaged fence and missing survey marker." Brenda stepped forward again. "Surely you're not opening an investigation." "I'm documenting a property dispute." She looked stunned. "I was the one who called for help." "You did." He looked back at the trench. "And now we're making sure we understand exactly whose property we're standing on." I folded the survey carefully and slid it back into its tube. For 18 months, I'd been trying to figure out why payments to the Walker Family Trust had suddenly stopped. Standing there beside that broken fence, watching Brenda struggle to explain land she didn't own, one thought became impossible to ignore. Maybe the missing money and today's excavation had never been separate problems. Maybe they had always been part of the same plan. That thought stayed with me all the way back to the ranch. The sheriff had stopped the contractor from doing any more work until the property dispute could be reviewed, but he hadn't ruled on ownership beyond what the county records already showed. That wasn't his job. His job was keeping the peace. Mine was proving the truth. As I drove through my front gate, I looked toward the lake that had defined my family's life for generations. My grandfather used to say the water wasn't the valuable part. "The shoreline is what everyone fights over," he'd tell me. "Water moves. Boundaries don't." At the time, I thought he was talking about fishing spots. Years later, I finally understood. I walked straight into the farmhouse office and unlocked the steel filing cabinet that held the trust records. The Walker Family Trust wasn't complicated. Every lease payment, every survey, every amendment, every easement. Everything had been recorded twice, once in county records and once in our files. My grandfather trusted paperwork more than promises. I spread the annual payment summaries across the desk. For decades, they followed the same pattern. One payment every year, always on time, Always from Maple Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. Then the pattern stopped. 18 months earlier. No explanation. No request for an extension. No notice of financial hardship. Nothing. Just silence. The amount wasn't insignificant. The annual ground lease funded property taxes, shoreline maintenance, dam inspections, and trust expenses. Without it, the trust absorbed every cost itself. At first, I'd assumed it was an accounting mistake. Then I sent a certified demand letter. No response. 30 days later, I sent another. Still nothing. Instead, something else arrived. A knock on my front door. I already knew who it was before opening it. Brenda Holloway stood on my porch carrying a leather portfolio. She smiled exactly the way she had beside the excavator. Professional, patient, completely certain she controlled the conversation. Ethan. Brenda. I thought it would be easier if we spoke face to face. I've been asking for that for months. She ignored the comment. I brought paperwork. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. That told me more about her than anything she could have said. She believed every space eventually became hers. She placed several folders neatly across my dining table. The board has identified a few compliance concerns. I looked down. Violation notice, architectural review, property appearance, mailbox standards, fence color, generator visibility, exterior storage. I couldn't help smiling. You know this property isn't inside Maple Ridge. She folded her hands. You're surrounded by Maple Ridge. That's geography. It's community. It's still not jurisdiction. She slid another document toward me. This solves that. Across the top it read, Voluntary HOA Membership Agreement. I didn't touch it. You want me to join? It would eliminate unnecessary conflict. I don't have unnecessary conflict. You do now. I looked at her for several seconds. Then another document caught my attention. It wasn't an HOA form. It was a boundary adjustment proposal. Highlighted in yellow was nearly an acre of my shoreline. The proposed adjustment shifted the legal line just enough to widen the marina entrance road. What is this? A practical solution. For whom? For everyone. It gives Maple Ridge almost an acre. It simplifies future maintenance. It transfers trust property. She leaned forward. It's only land. I met her eyes. It's exactly land. She slid one final packet across the table. This one was thicker than the others. Master Ground Lease Amendment. 40-year extension. Automatic renewal language. Expanded development authority. Future infrastructure rights. Buried halfway through page 7 was the sentence that made me stop reading. The HOA could assign certain development rights to approved third parties without additional trustee approval. I closed the folder. Who drafted this? Our attorneys. For what project? She hesitated. Barely a second. But I saw it. There isn't a project. Then why expand development rights? Planning ahead. No, I stood. You're planning something. She remained seated. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I walked to the window overlooking the lake. My grandfather refused to sell this property 3 different times. I'm aware. He leased it because he believed families deserved homes without giving away the land forever. That was decades ago. The lease wasn't. She finally stood. Ethan. Her tone softened. You're one ranch surrounded by 96 homeowners. I know exactly how many. They expect progress. I expect contracts to be honored. She picked up her portfolio. I hope you'll reconsider. I won't. You haven't even spoken with the developers. The word slipped out before she realized it. Developers. Plural. I looked back at her. What developers? She froze. For the first time since we'd met, she looked uncertain. I didn't say developers. You just did. I meant future planning. You said developers. She closed the portfolio. This conversation is over. It just became interesting. Without another word, she walked toward the door. Before leaving, she turned one last time. You own 6 acres around this farmhouse. Correct. But everything around you belongs to Maple Ridge. I shook my head. No. It functions as one community. It functions on leased land. Her smile disappeared. We'll see. The front door closed behind her. I immediately called Rachel Donovan. She answered on the second ring. Rachel. I need you to look into Silver Peak Development. What happened? I think someone wants development rights they don't legally have. Why? Because the HOA president just tried to convince me to sign them away. There was a brief silence. Don't sign anything. I wasn't planning to. I'm coming out tomorrow. The next afternoon, Rachel spread Brenda's documents across my dining table. She didn't start with the violation notices. She barely glanced at the membership agreement. Instead, she focused entirely on the lease amendment. After 20 minutes, she leaned back. This isn't about HOA compliance. I didn't think so. It's about control. She tapped page 7. If you signed this, the trust would lose approval rights over future shoreline development. Meaning? Meaning someone could build without asking your family again. She opened her laptop. Let's see who's buying land nearby. Less than 5 minutes later, she turned the screen toward me. Silver Peak Development, investor presentation, confidential marketing brochure accidentally left accessible on a public server. Across the first page was a rendering of luxury lakefront homes, private docks, expanded marina, walking trails, and a familiar stretch of shoreline, my shoreline. One sentence beneath the illustration caught both our eyes. Future expansion subject to final land control documentation. Rachel looked at me. They don't have it. No, they're expecting it. I remembered Brenda standing in my kitchen. It's only land. Now I finally understood why she wanted my signature so badly. Because without it, the entire expansion was worthless. Rachel printed the Silver Peak brochure and placed it beside Brenda's proposed lease amendment. The shoreline matched. The marina road matched. Even the drainage corridor beside my fence matched the route shown on the developer's site plan. The excavator hadn't crossed my land by accident. It had been testing access for a project that did not legally exist yet. Rachel circled one phrase in the amendment, assignable development authority. This is the key, she said. If you sign, Brenda can hand control to Silver Peak without coming back to you. And if I don't, they can't build across trust property. I looked at the rendering again. 70 luxury homes crowded the western shoreline, where cattle still watered beneath cottonwoods. The project included a widened marina entrance, a private service road, and underground drainage running directly through the section Brenda's contractor had already disturbed. They started before they had approval. Rachel nodded. That gives us leverage. The first response came the next morning. An orange notice had been stapled to my wooden gate. Unsafe property condition. Below it, in smaller print, review pending by Maple Ridge Estates Architectural Committee. I photographed it before removing it. By noon, a county inspector arrived following an anonymous complaint about an unpermitted fuel tank. There was no fuel tank. The inspector apologized, closed the complaint, and gave me a copy of the report. The following day, another complaint claimed my generator violated noise limits. A third accused me of blocking an emergency access lane. Each one collapsed under basic inspection. Each one went into the file. Then my work truck disappeared. I had parked it on the gravel access road between the farmhouse and my equipment shed, a route shown on every Walker survey since 1968. When I stepped outside, all that remained were fresh tire marks and a towing receipt wired to the fence, authorized by Maple Ridge HOA. Rachel called the towing company while I called Sheriff Harmon. The truck was returned 3 hours later. The tow operator admitted Brenda had personally identified the road as HOA property. Sheriff Harmon documented the statement. "She's testing how far she can push," he said. "Then I'll make sure every push leaves a record." That evening, I installed 2 trail cameras facing the western boundary and 1 overlooking the gate. No warning speeches, no confrontation, just timestamps. 2 nights later, 1 camera captured a white utility pickup stopping near the fence. A man stepped out, pulled an orange survey stake from the ground, and tossed it into the truck bed. The company logo on the door belonged to KCS Site Services. Rachel searched the state business registry. The company had been formed 8 months earlier. Its mailing address matched Brenda Holloway's real estate office. "That's not subtle," I said. "It doesn't have to be," Rachel replied. "Not if she believes nobody will challenge her." We sent preservation letters to Brenda, the HOA board, KCS Site Services, and Silver Peak Development. They were instructed to retain emails, contracts, maps, invoices, phone records, and all documents related to my property. Brenda answered within 2 hours. Her letter accused me of harassing the board and interfering with essential drainage repairs. She also claimed the HOA possessed historic community rights across the shoreline. Rachel read that sentence twice. Historic rights isn't a legal description. It sounds convincing. That's the point. The next morning, Tom Alvarez drove up in an old Ford pickup with 2 survey tubes resting across the passenger seat. Tom had spent 38 years surveying ranches, subdivisions, canals, and mining claims across western Colorado. He had known my grandfather and worked on one of the original Maple Ridge plats before retiring. He unrolled a faded map across my dining table. "This was the first subdivision filing," he said. The document showed the farmhouse exclusion, the leased residential parcels, the marina easement, and the drainage corridor. Nothing matched Brenda's claims. Tom tapped the western shoreline. "Your grandfather allowed limited access here, 12 feet wide, maintenance only." Rachel placed the new developer plan beside it. Silver Peak's proposed road was 40 feet wide. Their drainage system crossed outside the easement. Their marina expansion extended into water frontage still controlled by the trust. Tom shook his head. "They're not improving an easement. They're trying to turn it into a development corridor," I said. He nodded. Then he removed a second map. This one had never been included in the homeowner's public packet. It was a preliminary engineering overlay from the original developer. A handwritten note near the western boundary read, "No future expansion without Walker Trust consent." Rachel photographed it immediately. "Where did you find this?" "My old project archive." "Is it recorded?" "The final plat references it by drawing number." That made it admissible as part of the development history. More important, it proved the original planners knew the HOA's authority ended at my boundary. Brenda wasn't correcting an old oversight. She was trying to erase a limitation that had been there from the beginning. Rachel sent a formal records demand to the HOA that afternoon. Board minutes, bank statements, vendor contracts, ground lease collections, developer communications, loan documents. Every transaction involving Silver Peak. Under Colorado law and the recorded lease, the trust had inspection rights tied to rent collection and shared infrastructure. Brenda refused. Her response claimed the records contained confidential homeowner information and could not be released. Rachel filed a second demand, narrower and more precise. Brenda refused again. Then the pressure turned public. Bright yellow leaflets appeared in mailboxes across Maple Ridge. "Protect our community from outside land claims." The leaflet warned that an absentee trust owner was threatening the clubhouse, marina, and home values. It never used my name. It didn't need to. At the bottom was an invitation to an emergency HOA meeting. I attended. Brenda stood beneath the clubhouse lights and told nearly 80 homeowners that I was trying to exploit outdated documents. She said Silver Peak's project would protect property values, improve drainage, and secure the neighborhood's future. Then she displayed the same expansion rendering Rachel and I had found online. One homeowner raised his hand. Does Mr. Walker have to approve this? Brenda paused. Our attorneys are resolving the documentation. That was not an answer. Another woman asked, Have we been paying ground rent? Brenda's tone sharpened. This meeting is about community stability. I stood near the back. I'm willing to answer that. The room turned toward me. Brenda's face tightened. You were not invited to speak. I'm the trustee whose land appears in your presentation. Murmurs spread across the chairs. I held up the original plat Tom had found. The access shown behind you is 4 times wider than the recorded easement. The marina expansion crosses Trust shoreline. The drainage route leaves the approved corridor. Brenda gripped the podium. Those are your interpretations. No, they're measurements. I placed copies of the map on the nearest table. Your board knew this project required my consent. A man in the front row looked at Brenda. Do you have his consent? She stared at me instead. This is why he needs to join the association. One community should not be held hostage by one man. I kept my voice level. I'm not holding anyone hostage. I'm asking you to honor the deed, the lease, and the property line. The room went quiet. Then Rachel stepped through the rear doors carrying a legal envelope. She walked directly to Brenda and handed it across the podium. Formal notice, she said. The Walker Family Trust is demanding a full accounting of every ground lease payment collected during the last 18 months. Brenda did not open it. Rachel continued. If those records are not produced, we will seek a court order. For the first time, the homeowners weren't looking at me as the threat. They were looking at Brenda. Her campaign had been designed to isolate me. Instead, she had created an audience. And now every person in that clubhouse wanted to know the same thing. What was hidden inside the financial records she refused to release? Brenda had 10 business days to comply. She used all 10. On the final afternoon, a delivery truck stopped outside my farmhouse and unloaded 23 cardboard boxes onto the porch. No index. No labels beyond dates written in black marker. Some boxes held duplicate invoices. Others contained water-stained statements, unsigned contracts, and meeting packets arranged in no recognizable order. Rachel stood beside me, staring at the pile. This is deliberate. She technically produced the records. She technically buried them. We carried everything into the dining room. Tom Alvarez helped clear the table. Rachel brought 2 document scanners. I set up a spreadsheet to track dates, payment amounts, vendors, and account numbers. Then Rachel introduced Megan Brooks. Megan was a forensic accountant with the calm expression of someone who trusted numbers more than explanations. She set down 1 laptop, 1 yellow legal pad, and a travel mug. Where are the bank statements? Rachel pointed towards 6 boxes. Maybe? Megan opened the first one. Then we start there. For 3 days, we worked through the mess. The HOA collected roughly $240 a month from each of Maple Ridge's 96 households. The statements called it a consolidated community assessment, but older ledgers divided that amount into operating dues, reserve contributions, and ground lease payments. The homeowners had paid. Month after month. Automatic withdrawals, checks from retirees, online payments from young families, late fees from people already struggling. The money entered HOA accounts exactly as required. It just never reached the Walker Family Trust. Megan lined up 18 months of bank statements across the table. Here's the pattern. She pointed to deposits arriving during the first week of each month, then to transfers leaving within 48 hours. At first, the payments looked ordinary. Landscape maintenance, compliance consulting, community administration, drainage planning. But the amounts repeated too cleanly. $8,900, $12,400, $7,650, again and again, always just below the threshold requiring a second board signature. Rachel leaned closer. Who approved them? Brenda. Everyone? Everyone I've checked. Tom opened a vendor folder. KCS Site Services. That was the company whose truck had removed my survey stake. Megan searched the business registry. The mailing address matched Brenda's real estate office. The registered agent was her cousin, Daniel Holloway. Next came Holloway Community Consulting. Then Western Neighborhood Compliance. Then Ridge Property Solutions. Different names, different invoices. Same phone number, same bank branch. Two used the same post office box. Rachel's jaw tightened. Related party contracts require disclosure. Was any disclosed? I asked. Megan turned the laptop toward us. Not in these minutes. The invoices were worse. One charged $18,700 for emergency shoreline stabilization during a month when no shoreline work occurred. Another billed $14,200 for legal document review but listed no attorney. A landscaping company received monthly payments for maintaining acreage the HOA did not own. Tom read one description twice. Vegetation control along future western expansion corridor. He looked at me. They were billing homeowners to prepare your land for Silver Peak. That shifted the room. Until then, we had been looking at missing rent. Now we were looking at homeowner money financing an unauthorized development effort. Megan opened another spreadsheet. There's more. She had traced a series of transfers into a separate reserve account. The account should have held money for roads, drainage, the clubhouse roof, and marina repairs. Instead, nearly $190,000 had moved into an account labeled Strategic Community Acquisition. Rachel frowned. That isn't in the approved budget. No. Was there a homeowner vote? I haven't found one. Megan clicked again. The money had been used as part of a loan application. The HOA had borrowed $600,000. Collateral listed: clubhouse, marina facilities, internal roads, drainage infrastructure. I stared at the screen. They pledged property they don't own. Rachel nodded slowly. Or property they wanted the bank to believe they owned. The ground lease prohibited using trust-owned land or improvements attached to it as collateral without trustee approval. No one had asked me. No one had asked my grandfather. Tom found the meeting minutes tied to the loan. The first copy said the board discussed financing options. The second, produced from another box, said the board unanimously approved the loan. Same meeting date, same attendees, different language. Megan compared the files. The approval paragraph was added later. Can you prove it? I asked. The page numbers change, the font changes, and the version sent to the bank was created 3 weeks after the meeting. Rachel marked it for preservation. By the fourth night, the dining room floor had become a map of Brenda's operation. Blue folders held ground rent records. Red folders held related party vendors. Green folders held Silver Peak communications. Yellow folders held altered board minutes and loan documents. Every pile pointed toward the same center. Brenda. Then Megan found the first direct payment. It was buried inside a vendor reimbursement report. Silver Peak Development had transferred $75,000 to Holloway Community Consulting under the description Preliminary Entitlement Coordination. 10 days later, Brenda presented me with the 40-year lease amendment. Rachel read the dates twice. She was already being paid. To get my signature? I asked. To deliver control. We kept searching. A second transfer appeared 3 months later. $125,000. Development Milestone Consulting. The milestone listed in the attached invoice was land control documentation, substantially complete. But it wasn't complete. I had refused to sign. So either Brenda had lied to Silver Peak, or she had another document. Megan leaned back. There's a missing file sequence. She showed us the numbering system used in Brenda's development folders. SP17, SP18, SP20, no SP19. Rachel searched every box. Nothing. Tom checked the scanned files. Still nothing. Then I noticed an invoice folded inside an architectural review folder. The description read, Digitization and Execution Support, Walker Lease Amendment. Attached was a payment to Ridge Property Solutions. The date was 6 months before Brenda ever brought the amendment to my house. At the bottom was a handwritten note. Final signature version stored separately. Rachel looked at me. Your grandfather ever sign an extension? Never. Could Brenda claim he did? Only if she had a document. Megan closed the folder. The missing rent isn't the beginning. She tapped the invoice. It's the cover. The diverted money, fake vendors, unauthorized loan, and developer payments all led toward one piece of paper we had not yet seen. A lease amendment someone had worked very hard to keep outside those 23 boxes. Rachel filed an emergency motion to compel production. The judge gave the HOA 48 hours. Brenda waited until the final hour. Then a courier delivered one sealed envelope to Rachel's office. Inside was a copy of a 40-year extension to the Walker Ground lease. The signature at the bottom looked like my grandfather's. For a few seconds, I couldn't speak. Rachel placed the document under a desk lamp. Don't react to the signature, she said. React to the details. The agreement claimed my grandfather signed it on March 17th, 2 years earlier, at 2:30 in the afternoon. It granted Maple Ridge expanded authority over the western shoreline, marina access, drainage corridors, and future development. It also gave the HOA the right to assign those interests to Silver Peak. Exactly what Brenda had tried to get from me. Only this version claimed the trust had already agreed. Brenda's attorney sent a letter with it. The letter accused me of interfering with valid contractual rights and warned that the HOA would seek damages if I continued blocking construction. Rachel read it once. Then she smiled without humor. They finally showed us what the whole scheme depends on. I stared at the signature. My grandfather was in the hospital that spring. Do you remember the date? I remember the month. We drove straight to the farmhouse. My grandfather, Harold Walker, sat near the kitchen window with a blanket over his knees. Since his stroke, speech came slowly, but his mind remained sharp. I set the agreement in front of him. Did you sign this? He studied the first page, then the last. His hand tightened around the paper. No. The word came rough but clear. Rachel pulled a chair closer. Mr. Walker, were you in the hospital on March 17? He nodded. ICU. Could you sign documents? He looked at me. Couldn't hold spoon. That was enough to start. Rachel obtained a medical authorization and requested the hospital records. Megan examined the document itself. The signature looked correct from a distance, but when she enlarged the scan, the black ink broke differently from the rest of the page. It isn't ink, she said. She magnified it again. A faint rectangular edge surrounded the signature. It's an image. Rachel pulled an older lease from the trust files. My grandfather's signature on that document matched the new one perfectly. Not similar. Perfect. Every curve, every pause, every tiny ink skip. Someone had copied it and pasted it into the amendment. The hospital records arrived the next morning. At 2:30 p.m. on March 17th, Harold Walker was listed as sedated, intubated, and unresponsive following emergency surgery. A neurologist had documented that he was incapable of communication or consent. Rachel placed the medical chart beside the amendment. That destroys execution, unless they claim he signed earlier. They gave an exact time. Megan pointed to the notary block. Then let's check the witness. The document had been notarized by Charles Weller. Rachel searched the state commission database. No active commission appeared for that date. She searched county records next. Then she stopped. Charles Weller had died 6 months before the supposed signing. Nobody said anything. The room felt smaller. A forged signature was bad. A dead notary turned it into something no lawyer could explain away as sloppy paperwork. Rachel immediately sent the file to a digital document examiner. By evening, he confirmed the lease amendment had been assembled electronically. The text had been created in one program, the signature inserted as a separate image. the notary seal copied from an older recorded instrument. Metadata showed the original file was generated on a computer registered to Ridge Property Solutions, the same vendor tied to Brenda's development paperwork. The same company paid for execution support. The same company whose invoices Brenda had approved. Megan leaned back from her laptop. She thought nobody would compare the dates. Rachel shook her head. She thought nobody would ever get the file. We now had evidence of diverted funds, self-dealing contracts, an unauthorized loan, and a forged land agreement tied directly to the Silver Peak project. But the stakes had changed. If Brenda filed the amendment in court first, she could frame the dispute as a valid contract fight and delay us long enough for Silver Peak to secure financing. If we challenged it without protecting the remaining records, someone could destroy the trail connecting the forgery to the money. Rachel prepared 3 filings at once, one to freeze construction, one to preserve digital evidence, one to block any transfer of development rights. Sheriff Harmon received copies of the hospital records and metadata. He read them in silence. This is no longer just a boundary dispute. No, Rachel said, it isn't. That afternoon, Brenda called me directly. It was the first time since the clubhouse meeting. You need to stop this, she said. I didn't forge the lease. You don't understand what you're risking. I understand exactly what my family owns. Silver Peak can bring resources this community desperately needs. Then they should have negotiated legally. Her voice hardened. Your grandfather agreed. He was unconscious. Silence. Not surprise. Calculation. Then she said, hospital records don't tell the whole story. A dead notary does. The line went quiet. I could hear her breathing. When she spoke again, the polished tone was gone. You should think carefully about how much damage you're willing to cause. To whom? Everyone. She ended the call. I saved the recording and sent it to Rachel. That evening, we moved the most important trust documents from the farmhouse office into locked storage. The original plats, lease copies, easement records, correspondence between my grandfather and the first developer. I checked every door before going to bed. At 2:14 in the morning, an alarm sounded from my grandfather's room. I ran down the hall and found him sitting upright, pointing toward the western window. Orange light flickered against the glass. For 1 second, I thought it was a vehicle. Then I saw the smoke. The old equipment barn was on fire. By the time I reached the porch, flames were already pushing through the roof. I grabbed the garden hose out of instinct before realizing it wouldn't matter. The fire had a head start. I called 911 while running toward the barn. My equipment building is on fire. The dispatcher asked whether anyone was inside. No. Only then did I remember what was stored there. Not machinery, records, decades of them, original surveys, old correspondence, lease copies, engineering drawings. My grandfather had kept everything in labeled filing cabinets along the back wall. The fire department arrived within minutes, followed closely by Sheriff Luke Harmon. Firefighters pulled attack lines, while another crew prevented the flames from reaching the nearby fuel shed. I tried to move toward the side entrance. A firefighter stopped me with one hand against my shoulder. You can't go in. My family records are in there. The roof's already failing. As if to prove his point, part of the western wall collapsed inward. The filing cabinets disappeared behind sparks and smoke. I stood there helplessly. Not because I was losing a building. Buildings can be rebuilt. What I thought I was losing couldn't. Generations of documentation. The written history of the Walkerland. When the fire was finally under control, the barn was little more than a blackened frame. Sheriff Harmon walked beside the fire marshal without saying much. The marshal examined the electrical panel first, then the service disconnect. He frowned. Power wasn't feeding this building. What do you mean? I asked. The main breaker is off. I looked closer. The disconnect handle had been locked in the off position. The barn hadn't been energized. Electrical failure wasn't possible. The marshal moved to the side entrance. The padlock lay on the ground, cut cleanly, bolt cutters, not forced, not broken. Cut. He photographed it before placing it into an evidence bag. Then he circled the structure slowly. Near the northeast corner, he knelt beside the foundation. Another investigator joined him. Neither spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, the marshal stood. "I've got two separate points of origin." Sheriff Harmon looked toward him. "Accidental?" "Too early." He paused. "But two ignition areas usually aren't accidental." I felt something tighten in my chest. The timing wasn't a coincidence. Not after the forged lease. Not after the financial records. Not after Brenda's phone call. Rachel arrived before sunrise. She didn't ask how much damage had been done. She asked one question. What was inside? I listed everything I could remember. Old surveys, lease correspondence, my grandfather's handwritten notes, historical plats, meeting letters from the original developer. Rachel closed her eyes briefly. If someone wanted to weaken the trust's case, they'd burn the archive. She nodded. That's exactly what this looks like. I walked back toward the farmhouse in silence. My grandfather sat at the kitchen table, staring through the window toward the smoke still drifting above the trees. I couldn't bring myself to tell him. He already knew. He slowly reached into the pocket of his robe. Then he placed a small brass key on the table. I looked at it. What is this? His voice was still slow after the stroke, but every word mattered. Bank, I frowned. What bank? He pointed toward the key. County. Rachel leaned forward. Safe deposit box? He nodded once, then smiled for the first time in days. Never trusted one copy. The drive to the county bank took 25 minutes. The manager verified my authority as trustee before leading us into the vault. Box 417. The brass key fit perfectly. Inside sat 3 thick envelopes. Every one sealed. Every one labeled in my grandfather's handwriting. Master lease, original surveys, trust recordings. Rachel opened the first envelope carefully. Inside were certified copies bearing county recording stamps, not photocopies. Certified reproductions issued directly by the recorder's office, the original lease, every amendment, every exclusion, every easement, every signature, every page. The second envelope contained survey plats dating back more than 40 years, including Tom Alvarez's original field notes from the subdivision. The third held correspondence between my grandfather and the first developer. One letter immediately caught Rachel's attention. It stated clearly, "No future expansion beyond the recorded development area shall occur without written approval from the Walker Family Trust." Signed, dated, recorded as an attachment to the lease negotiations. Rachel looked at me. This survives everything. The fire hadn't erased our case. It had only destroyed duplicate copies. My grandfather had anticipated exactly this possibility decades earlier. By the time we returned to the ranch, investigators were still processing the barn. The fire marshal met us near the driveway. "I've got preliminary findings." Sheriff Harmon stood beside him. The fire wasn't electrical. I figured. There are traces of an accelerant. He pointed toward 2 marked locations. Bomb. Both ignition points tested positive. That elevated the investigation immediately. This was no longer simply suspicious. It was potentially criminal. One of the deputies walked over carrying a tablet. "We pulled traffic cameras from County Road 14. Sheriff Harmon reviewed the images, then handed the screen to me. A white SUV passed the intersection 23 minutes before the fire. The company logo on the driver's door was unmistakable. KCS Site Services, the same company that had removed my survey stake. The same company connected to Brenda's cousin. The vehicle returned 41 minutes later. Heading away from my ranch, Rachel quietly photographed the screen. "Preserve that." The deputy nodded. "We already have." Before sunset, another call came. Megan Brooks sounded unusually serious. I found something. What? I was tracing payments from KCS, and there was an $8,500 transfer 3 days before the fire. Description? She hesitated. Emergency records management. I felt cold despite the afternoon heat. Anything after the fire? Yes, another pause. 24 hours later. Amount? $12,000. Description? Project completion. Rachel looked directly at me. No contractor gets paid for project completion the day after an accidental fire. Before I could answer, Sheriff Harmon approached with another evidence technician. They recovered footage from your Western Trail camera. I thought the fire melted it. The memory card survived. He held up a sealed evidence bag. We're sending it to the lab. For the first time since watching the barn burn, I felt something other than loss. Hope. Because whoever had planned the fire believed they were destroying the truth. Instead, they may have recorded themselves trying. The state crime lab returned the memory card 3 days later. Sheriff Harmon, Rachel, Megan, Tom, and I gathered inside the county conference room. The technician connected the recovered footage to a monitor. At first, the screen showed nothing but darkness. Then the infrared image sharpened. 11:48 p.m. A white KCS Site Services SUV rolled through my western gate. It stopped beside the equipment barn. 2 men climbed out. Neither wore masks. One carried bolt cutters. The other carried 2 red fuel cans. Nobody spoke in the room. The footage continued. One man cut the padlock. The second disappeared behind the barn. Less than 2 minutes later, he returned carrying an empty can. Then both men drove away. At 12:07 a.m., they came back. This time, they walked to opposite corners of the building. The screen flashed white. Flames appeared almost simultaneously. The fire marshal paused the video. That's consistent with our ignition analysis. Sheriff Harmon nodded. 2 ignition points. Exactly as he'd suspected. The footage alone proved arson, but it didn't prove who ordered it. Then the technician zoomed into the driver's side of the SUV. The company logo became clear. So did the fleet number. KCS 12. Megan opened her laptop immediately. I've seen that vehicle. Within seconds, she found the equipment reimbursement logs. KCS 12 had billed the HOA for shoreline inspection services 17 different times. Every invoice carried Brenda Holloway's approval. Rachel looked toward the sheriff. I'd like preservation orders served immediately. They already are. By sunset, deputies had executed search warrants at KCS Site Services. Computers, phones, accounting servers, vehicle GPS logs, fuel purchase receipts. Every digital record was seized. The following morning, Sheriff Harmon called. We found something you should hear in person. Rachel and I drove to the county building. The sheriff placed 3 printed emails on the table, recovered from KCS's server. The first came from Silver Peak Development. Subject: Land Control Schedule. The second came from Brenda. Delay excavation until amendment finalized. The third stopped everyone. Subject: Archive risk. The message read, Walker still has historical files. If those records disappear, title arguments become much simpler. No one spoke. Sheriff Harmon slid over another page. The reply came from KCS's operations manager. Understood. We'll handle the archive issue. The timestamp matched the week before my barn burned. Rachel quietly folded her hands. That's conspiracy. It appears that way, the sheriff replied. There are still interviews to conduct. 2 days later, another surprise arrived. 3 Maple Ridge homeowners requested meetings with Rachel. None wanted publicity. All wanted to talk. The first was an elderly retired teacher. She brought HOA newsletters dating back 15 years. Every issue described the clubhouse land as leased from the Walker Family Trust. 5 years ago, the wording suddenly changed. Community-owned clubhouse. No explanation, no board vote, just different language. The second homeowner produced annual meeting packets. The lease payment line disappeared from the budget the same year Brenda became HOA president. It hadn't been removed. It had simply been renamed Community Infrastructure Reserve. The money continued to be collected. The description changed. The third homeowner had served briefly on the finance committee. He handed Megan a flash drive. I made backups before I resigned. The files contained draft budgets. Unlike the official versions, these drafts still listed annual ground lease obligations. Every draft included handwritten notes. Delay payment. Need revised agreement first. BH, Rachel looked at the initials. Brenda Holloway. The former committee member nodded. I asked questions. What happened? I wasn't reappointed. Megan imported the flash drive into her database. The timeline became unmistakable. Year 1, ground lease paid normally. Year 2, payments delayed. Year 3, money redirected. Year 4, Silver Peak negotiations begin. Year 5, forgery created. Construction planning starts. The barn burns. Everything fit. Not because of assumptions, because every document pointed to the next one. Rachel organized the evidence into binders. Volume 1, Ownership. Volume 2, Lease History. Volume 3, Financial Diversion. Volume 4, Forgery. Volume 5, Developer Communications. Volume 6, Arson Evidence. Each page cross-referenced another. Nothing stood alone. Tom smiled as he closed the final binder. Your grandfather would have appreciated this. He believed paper outlasted memory. And now, Rachel added, every piece supports the others. The sheriff wasn't finished. He entered carrying another folder. We interviewed the 2 KCS employees. I looked up. They confess? Not exactly. He opened the report. They admitted setting the fire. The room froze. They claimed they believed they were destroying abandoned storage under a demolition authorization. Who gave them that authorization? Rachel asked. Sheriff Harmon turned one page. They both named the same person, Brenda Holloway. According to their statements, Brenda told them the Walker Trust had approved removal of the old archive building as part of the upcoming redevelopment. She allegedly provided copies of the forged lease amendment. The workers said they never questioned it. They admitted using gasoline because they believed controlled burning had been approved after demolition. The fire spread further than expected. Whether that explanation would withstand court was another matter. But it accomplished one thing. It placed Brenda directly between the forged lease and the burned barn. That afternoon, deputies executed another warrant, this time at Brenda's home office. Computers, paper files, external hard drives, everything. By evening, local news helicopters circled above Maple Ridge. Homeowners gathered outside the clubhouse, watching investigators carry out boxes. Nobody applauded, nobody cheered. Most simply looked confused. For years, they had trusted the board. Now every television station in the county was reporting the same headline: HOA finances under criminal investigation. Brenda finally appeared outside the building surrounded by attorneys. Reporters shouted questions. Did you forge the Walker lease? Did HOA money fund Silver Peak? Did you authorize the barn fire? She answered none of them. She climbed into a waiting SUV and left. Rachel watched the news broadcast beside me. This isn't over. I know. The criminal case will take time. What about ours? She closed the last evidence binder. Ours goes first. In 2 weeks, we're asking Judge Eleanor Hayes to decide who actually controls the land. For months, Brenda had relied on confusion. Confusing homeowners, confusing banks, confusing contractors, confusing county officials. But confusion doesn't survive organized evidence. And for the first time since 3 patrol cars rolled onto my ranch, the facts were no longer scattered across boxes, burned buildings, or forgotten files. They were waiting together in one courtroom. Judge Eleanor Hayes entered exactly at 9. The courtroom stood. When she took her seat, she looked first at Rachel, then at Brenda's legal team. I've reviewed the preliminary filings, she said. Today we're addressing ownership, lease enforcement, and the request for injunctive relief. Criminal matters remain outside this hearing. That was exactly where Rachel wanted the focus, not accusations, documents. Brenda sat at the defense table wearing the same calm expression she had worn on my porch months earlier. Only now, 2 empty chairs separated her from the rest of the HOA board. Several directors had hired independent counsel after the financial investigation became public. They weren't standing with her anymore. Rachel called me first. I testified about the trust, the missing lease payments, the excavation, and Brenda's attempt to obtain my signature. Every statement was supported by an exhibit. Photographs, certified deeds, survey maps, demand letters. No speculation. Only records. Brenda's attorney tried to suggest the trust had abandoned portions of the shoreline through decades of public use. Rachel objected immediately. Judge Hayes sustained it. Public use does not transfer recorded ownership. The attorney changed direction. He argued that the HOA had invested millions maintaining roads, drainage systems, and community facilities. Judge Hayes looked down at the lease. Maintenance obligations do not alter title. Rachel nodded once. The foundation of their defense had already begun to crack. Next came Tom Alvarez. He walked the court through the original subdivision plats, the field notes, and the engineering overlay preserved in my grandfather's safe deposit box. Using enlarged exhibits, he showed that every version of the recorded plans stopped the HOA boundary at the exact same line. The clubhouse, the marina road, the drainage corridor. Everyone existed under the ground lease, not HOA ownership. Not once in 40 years had that changed. Brenda's attorney produced a colorful site map used in HOA meetings. Tom barely looked at it. That's a marketing exhibit. How can you tell? It has no recording number, no survey certification, no legal description, no surveyor's seal. He handed it back. It explains what someone hoped to build. It does not describe what anyone owns. The courtroom remained silent. Judge Hayes made several notes. Then Rachel called Megan Brooks. She projected the HOA's financial records onto a large screen. One column showed homeowner dues. The second showed required ground lease payments. The third showed what actually happened. For 18 consecutive months, homeowners paid the lease assessment. The HOA collected every dollar. The trust received none. Megan highlighted transfer after transfer into related companies. KCS Site Services, Holloway Community Consulting, Western Neighborhood Compliance. Every company connected through ownership, mailing address, or family relationships. Then she displayed the loan documents. The HOA pledged facilities standing on leased trust property as collateral. Brenda's attorney objected. Conclusion. Megan remained calm. The collateral schedule identifies the clubhouse, marina facilities, and shoreline infrastructure. She zoomed in. The recorded lease states those improvements remain subject to trust ownership. Judge Hayes read both documents herself. The objection was overruled. Rachel saved the strongest evidence for last. She placed the alleged lease amendment on the evidence screen. Then beside it, the hospital records. Then the death certificate for Charles Weller. Finally, the forensic document analysis. She spoke quietly. The defendants rely upon this amendment as the legal basis for expanded authority. She paused. The trust contends it was never lawfully executed. The courtroom watched as the signature overlays appeared. Every line matched an older document perfectly. Then came the metadata, creation date, editing history, computer registration, Ridge Property Solutions. Finally, Rachel displayed the hospital chart. March 17, 2:30 p.m., Harold Walker. Sedated, unable to communicate, unable to sign. Judge Hayes looked directly toward Brenda's counsel. Do you dispute these medical records? He stood slowly. No, Your Honor. Do you dispute the notary's death prior to the execution date? Another pause. No. Rachel didn't raise her voice. If the signer was medically incapable and the notary was deceased before the document was allegedly executed, there is no lawful execution. The defense asked for a recess. Judge Hayes granted 15 minutes. When everyone returned, something had changed. One of Brenda's attorneys was gone. Another remained. He approached the podium. Your Honor, my client withdraws reliance upon the disputed amendment. The courtroom stirred. Rachel remained seated. She had expected it. Judge Hayes leaned forward. Then on what basis does the HOA claim authority beyond the original lease? No answer came immediately. Instead, the attorney admitted the HOA relied upon long-standing community practice and substantial investment. Judge Hayes closed the lease binder. Community practice cannot rewrite recorded property interests. She then addressed the remaining issue. The court has reviewed certified title records, historical surveys, financial evidence, and the original lease. She looked directly toward Brenda. The evidence consistently demonstrates that the Walker Family Trust retained ownership of the disputed land. She continued, the HOA possesses only those rights expressly granted within the recorded ground lease. Then came the order. All unauthorized construction stopped immediately. The forged amendment was declared without legal effect for purposes of the civil proceedings. No development rights could be transferred to Silver Peak. No trust property could be pledged, modified, or occupied beyond the original lease. The HOA was ordered to produce complete financial records to a court-appointed receiver. An independent accounting would determine every diverted ground lease payment. Judge Hayes looked toward me. The trust is entitled to immediate possession and protection of its contractual rights. Months of pressure disappeared in a single sentence. But Judge Hayes wasn't finished. She looked toward Brenda one final time. I am referring the findings concerning the disputed amendment and related evidence to the appropriate authorities. She struck the gavel. Court is adjourned. Outside, reporters crowded the courthouse steps. Rachel answered only one question. This case was decided by recorded documents, not emotion. I didn't speak. I simply watched homeowners gather across the lawn. Many looked relieved. Some looked embarrassed. A few approached me quietly. One older resident removed his Maple Ridge board badge and placed it into my hand. I'm sorry, he said. We believed what we were told. I looked toward the courthouse doors. Brenda never came out through the front entrance. She left through a secured exit with her remaining attorney. For months, she had insisted one sentence. The land belongs to the HOA. Now a judge had answered with another. No, it never did. Judge Hayes's words followed me all the way back to the ranch. Not because they gave me something new, because they officially recognized what had always been true. The land had never changed hands. Only the story around it had. 3 days after the hearing, the court-appointed receiver arrived at the Maple Ridge clubhouse. Every financial account was frozen. Every contract was reviewed. Every outstanding project required court approval before another dollar could be spent. Silver Peak Development withdrew from the expansion before the week ended. Without the forged lease amendment, they had no legal path to the shoreline. Without the shoreline, the marina expansion failed. Without the marina, the luxury development no longer made financial sense. The glossy renderings disappeared from their website almost overnight. Then came the accounting. Megan spent nearly 2 months working alongside the receiver. When the final report was released, it answered every question homeowners had been asking. The HOA had collected every required ground lease payment. None had reached the Walker Family Trust during the previous 18 months. Instead, hundreds of thousands of dollars had been redirected into related companies, unauthorized consulting agreements, and development expenses tied to the proposed expansion. The receiver recommended immediate repayment of every unpaid lease obligation. The court approved it. The trust received every missed payment, along with interest required under the original lease. The HOA's insurance carrier refused to defend the forged lease amendment after reviewing the forensic evidence. Several civil claims were settled without trial. The unauthorized loan was renegotiated after the lender learned the clubhouse and marina facilities had been pledged under assumptions that did not match the recorded lease. Nothing happened overnight, but one document after another corrected the record. The board resigned together before the next annual election. Brenda Holloway submitted her resignation first. She never attended another Maple Ridge meeting. An interim board made up of homeowners took over until new elections could be held. Their first decision surprised me. They asked if I would attend, not as a board member, as the trustee. The meeting felt different from every confrontation that had come before. Nobody argued. Nobody demanded. One homeowner stood and faced the room. "We spent years believing the land belonged to us." He turned toward me. "It didn't." Another resident spoke next. "We also believed our dues were paying what the budget said." Megan quietly explained the receiver's report. Every answer came from documents, not opinions. The new board voted unanimously to restore the annual ground lease exactly as my grandfather and the original developer had negotiated decades earlier. They also adopted a policy requiring every future land agreement to be reviewed against recorded county documents before approval. Rachel smiled as the motion passed. That's how communities protect themselves. Tom Alvarez attended the meeting as well. Before leaving, he handed the new president a framed copy of the original subdivision plat. "Hang this where everyone can see it." She accepted it without hesitation. It should have been there from the beginning. The burned equipment barn was eventually cleared. Insurance covered part of the rebuilding costs. I chose not to rebuild it exactly as it had been. Instead, we built a smaller archive building with fire-resistant construction, digital backups, and secure document storage. The safe deposit box stayed exactly where my grandfather had left it. Some precautions deserved to become traditions. One afternoon, a few weeks after construction finished, my grandfather asked me to drive him down to the shoreline. We sat on the old wooden bench overlooking the lake. For a long time, neither of us said anything. Finally, he looked toward the clubhouse. Families were fishing from the dock. Children were riding bicycles along the same road the lease had always allowed them to use. The difference was simple. Everyone now understood why they could. Not because the HOA owned it, because someone had chosen to share it. My grandfather nodded toward the water. "Lease," I smiled. "I know. Never. Sell." "I won't." He looked satisfied. The fight had never been about keeping people away. It had been about making sure no one could quietly take what had been entrusted to our family. Months later, Sheriff Luke Harmon stopped by the ranch while finishing another call nearby. He stood beside the rebuilt fence and looked toward the lake. "Funny thing," he said. "What's that? When I first met you, I thought this was another neighborhood dispute. And now?" He laughed softly. "Now I know it was always a records case." I shook his hand. "And records won." "They usually do." After he drove away, I walked the boundary one more time. The new survey markers stood exactly where they belonged. The fence had been repaired. The drainage trench had been restored to the recorded easement. The unauthorized excavation had disappeared beneath fresh grass. The land looked almost unchanged, which somehow felt right, because justice hadn't transformed the ranch. It had simply returned everything to where it legally belonged. 3 patrol cars had arrived the day this started, because an HOA president insisted I was trespassing on my own land. Months later, the same county recognized, protected, and enforced the documents my family had preserved for generations. In the end, the strongest thing we owned wasn't the ranch. It wasn't the shoreline. It wasn't even the lease. It was the decision, made decades earlier, to record the truth carefully enough that no amount of pressure, money, or even fire could erase it. And that was the day the HOA lost the land, and the neighbors found their freedom.
If the story teaching anything, is that the stronger protections isn't a louder voice or a bigger fight. It's keeping good records, honoring agreements, and staying patient when the truth takes time to come to light. Ethan didn't win because he argued harder than anyone else. He won because every deed, every survey, every lease, and every honest piece of documentation pointed to the same truth. Even after a fire destroyed a building, the fight survived because his grandfather believed something was worth preserving carefully. That's a lesson that reaches far beyond property lines. There's something encouraging about that. Real strength is often quiet. It doesn't need to rethink, pause, or brush. It simply keeps showing up with honesty, preparations, and the confidence that what's true doesn't change just because someone say otherwise. Communities are strongest when neighbors respect one another, keep their words, and remember that fairness protects everyone in the long run. Now, I'd love to hear from you. If you think Ethan did the right thing by standing on the law instead of losing his tempers, comment 1. If you believe you would try to handle it differently, comment 0. Or if you ever had to stand your ground over your home, your land, or something that's mattered to your family from the word justice. I always enjoy reading your story, and they're one of the best part of this community. And if you enjoy story about ordinary people facing difficult situations with patience, determination, and respect,